Should we move over to SQL Server? Hey everyone, this is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com, and today I've got another In My Opinion video for you guys where you guys get to ask me any kind of questions that you'd like. They can be software development related, they might not be. Who knows? Anyway, today's question comes from Todd MS41, and Todd asks, my computer uses Access, and we need to track every transaction for an audit trail. Wah wah. In your opinion, should we do it all in Access, or should I look at the possibility of moving to a SQL backend? Sorry if this is a stupid question. Well, Todd, it's not a stupid question, okay? It's a great question. I get actually asked this question quite a bit. You're not the first one, and I think I might have even done a couple of videos on this particular subject before. So, basically, I'm going to say that in 99% of all scenarios, it's a good idea to switch your backend over to SQL Server, okay? Just number one, space, right? The size of which you can, of the data with which you can store in an Access database is maxed out at 2 gigs. So you can't really get much bigger. The second thing is, like, you're dealing with a file sitting on the network somewhere with an Access backend, right? It's just a file. And that really doesn't manage network, you know, it doesn't really have good network management that way. There needs to be like this service protocol managing the communication, and that's where SQL comes in. So, yes, you really should be moving over to SQL Server for a lot of different reasons, and that's why I actually even have my Advanced series in Access 2013. I do this Advanced series where I talk about doing the migration from out of an Access database over to a SQL Server. And there's tools, there's utilities to do this actually that are really nice. Microsoft has them available, and there's some links and stuff. So, yes, I absolutely think that 99% of the time you should be making the move over to a SQL database. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Number one, the dedication of a... So let me start with this. I've seen some very bad scenarios where, like, there's this small office and the boss has this one beefy computer that sits under their desk, and that's like where the Access database is stored. And then everybody else has like the front end somewhere on their computer, right? But they're all communicating to the boss's computer on the back end. Well, what happens if the boss accidentally shuts off his computer before he goes home, or she? They shut off their computer before they go home. Now all of a sudden, uh-oh, nobody has access to any of the data anymore. Okay, now that's not necessarily specifically an Access or SQL Server problem. That's just a best practices problem. But because Access allows you to do this, it's what a lot of offices do. And it's a bad idea. Instead, if anything, that Access backend file should reside on some sort of server whose sole purpose of that box, that computer, is just to host stuff that the server, the office uses, right? So any sort of file that is shared amongst all the other computers in the office, those files should be shared on one computer, on one PC. But then even that breaks down, right? So sometimes that can happen. And speaking of which, what do you do for backups, right? What do you do for backups? Well, SQL Server allows you to create these backups. You can even schedule maintenance so that every day you can have some sort of backup run, and then it's easier for you to do recovery. And you can do these incremental recoveries. You can do differentials and stuff like that. So that's a good thing. Then there's also there's just the network ability of having a service hosting your data with a SQL Server as opposed to a file, okay? Because the file can get locked, it can get moved around, it can, you know, it can suddenly disappear because somebody has access to that file and somebody accidentally hits delete or something. Whereas a service is really kind of hard to, like, you might be able to go in there and disable the service, And you might even be able to go in and into the server and go and delete the MDF file or something like that. But really, it's hard to shut down a service, right? It's harder. The level of entry of doing something wrong with a service is a little bit more difficult. So on that from that perspective, it's definitely better to have a SQL server hosting up your data as opposed to just a file, right, that just resides on the hard disk somewhere. And then I think probably the even bigger thing about having a service is that with SQL, once you put it onto the SQL service, then in case your boss or whoever IT comes along and says, you know what, we'd like to take what we're doing in our Access database and move it over to the web. Well, if you have all your data in an Access database, it can be done, like all your data in the database can be done and interact with some sort of front end, some sort of web application. But it's a little bit, I wouldn't say more difficult, it's just not something that's typically done. And especially because those files can be moved around, right? That Access database might get moved around somewhere and it's not as reliable for a front-end application like a web application to be relying upon. Whereas a service is going to continuously be hosting and always be running and putting it up. And then, of course, that leads to the question of, okay, what if we want to move this to the cloud, right? What if we want to host our web application up on the cloud? Well, there's lots of SQL databases up on the cloud, but there's not any like Access services on the cloud. Like that's not a thing. So your Access database being hosted up on the cloud is not really gonna work. Okay, I've seen some interesting solutions for that, but none of them really work long term. It's just better if you can get your data onto a SQL server and then, have that available for expansion later. And then the final thing, I guess, maybe I said final earlier, but this is actually the final thing, is you're talking about auditable, making something auditable, okay? Knowing what the access is to something. Well, you can turn on logging with SQL Server. You don't really have logging built into Access, right? There's no built-in Access logging. There is logging that you can enable and work with in SQL Server. So just from an auditing perspective, it's a little bit more difficult. You actually have to program Access to log things, whereas with SQL Server, it's just kind of built in. You got to turn it on as a feature. So there's kind of that too. There's this back and forth of trying to figure out how are you going to actually make your database log all this stuff. So it's not a dumb question, Todd. It's a great question. I get asked it all the time. I'm going to tell you that 99% sure, positive, yes, you should be moving your database backend into a SQL Server. Now, that being said, you can still use Access as the front end, as in all those forms and reports and queries that you run can still be in Access, okay? You can still use Access as the front end, and it's a great tool for building front end applications, okay? And it's great for even figuring out, at least initially, how to build an application that is database-centric, right? A database-oriented application. And then the next logical step is to take the data out of the Access database backend file and move it into a SQL Server. And there's some stuff that needs to be done in order to make all that happen. You've got to adjust your front end a little bit to make it all work. But the bottom line is, it's a great way to start. It's a great way to start your application inside of just a single Access application. And then once it gets so big or there's some sort of need, then move that data into a SQL Server. That is almost always the natural progression of any Access database, with few exceptions. All right, so there's my response to you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and let me know you liked it. If you didn't like it, you think I'm a total moron, think I'm just bereft of any sort of ability to think and comprehend, hit the thumbs down button, tell me how stupid I am, but make sure you do tell me in the comments section why you think I'm a total idiot, okay? Just hitting the thumbs down button just doesn't do me any good. I don't get anywhere, okay? And it's great that you're doing some sort of interactivity and you decided to do something with your thumb other than sitting on it, but please let me know why, okay? Awesome. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, like I said, and I get to see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.